Welcome to the Chosson and Shmooze you wish you got but never had, Part 26. As I've mentioned, and I continue to strongly ask of you to listen to these videos and these discussions in order, because is so much material and so much is built one on top of another. It's difficult to have misunderstandings. Many times I say things, and even though I've tried very hard to review what I'm going to say, I may issue addenda afterwards. So please listen carefully. Start from the beginning. The first one is entitled Intro, and then they go in order. You can find it on my YouTube channel at Simcha Feuerman, and then you go to the playlist Chosson Shmooze. After that, they follow one after another. The PDF of much of the content is available as well. If you send me an email, I can give you information on how to purchase that. Regarding the subject matter, again, much of this is very sensitive. We're doing this because it is important, and the mitzvah of ona, the mitzvah of giving pleasure to one's spouse, is key and vital. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation. Today, we're going to talk about some other different kinds of sexual dysfunctions and sexual problems. That's what we've been doing for the past couple of discussions. Let us start with something that happens with some degree of frequency, probably not as common as the others that we've studied. And this one has to do with problems of attraction. Now, there are different ways that this comes out, but it can be a source of difficulty and anguish for each spouse if, for whatever reason, there isn't a sense of physical attractiveness and desire. And this comes out in different ways. Sometimes it's a secret pain that one doesn't really share because it would be too hurtful, and other times it's expressed and that's hurtful. Other times there's a sense from the spouse that they're not being found attractive. There are a lot of different complications, and there's different kinds of situations as well. There are situations where people didn't really feel much attraction, whether it was physical or emotional. And when that occurred, for whatever reason, they decided to go ahead with the marriage anyway. Sometimes that's because the structure of the dating process, whether it's through a basho, which for you Litvaks means that there are people who have a custom of having really no dating whatsoever. Just the parents do a lot of research and choose a suitable husband or wife, and then the potential husband and wife meet each other for a very short amount of time. And oftentimes also there is technically a right of refusal, but that right oftentimes is overpowered by a great deal of social and peer pressure. So for example, a person who goes on a basho and meets their spouse for a half an hour in the living room and is not really sure if they're attracted to that person or not, they could say no, but it would be hard to keep saying no to 2 or 3 suggestions, because at that point one might be considered picky. And there's a lot of pressure on both sides. But even in the Litvish world, this occurs as well, because after a certain point, we generally don't date for entertainment. We date for the purposes of matrimony. So after 8 times or 9 times or 10 times or 5 times, it really depends on your particular community, there begins to develop a intense pressure to make up your mind. And that sometimes can be very difficult for a young man or a young woman to make. You might find things very attractive about the person and other things not. You might be attracted to them intellectually, but not physically. You might be attracted to them physically, but not intellectually. And I'm saying that this is complicated, and people sometimes go for advice, and oftentimes such advice relies on general truths and tropes instead of understanding the person specifically. So there certainly is a general truth that love develops and attraction develops. There is definitely a certain truth that you never can marry the most beautiful person in the world, because even if you do, tomorrow someone else will come along. There's also a truth that one should not marry somebody who they're not attracted to. There's so many truths, and different advisors will give people various tropes that are true in one degree or another, but they're not necessarily helpful to the person in their situation. And because of that, some people end up marrying not feeling fully comfortable with the attractiveness of the person they chose, whether the attractiveness was intellectual or emotional. And then that becomes a very big problem. Sometimes it just goes away because those things that people say have a lot of truth to them, that in time attraction develops. But sometimes it doesn't. And there are different reasons for that, which we will try to discuss with some degree of nuance, even though it's important to know that I can't really provide therapy over a video, nor can I provide halachic advice, as I have been saying all along. But I could try to provide some education. So sometimes you're dealing with a situation that's really tragic. Let's start with simple. Most people think that that's their situation, and probably it's the least likely. But it does happen once in a while. A person has a very weak ego or is naive about their own emotional or physical needs, and they date when they're very young, and they choose a partner who they feel pressured to choose by circumstance, by family, by what they think is considered the right thing to do, and they're really and truly, thoroughly, from beginning to end, not attracted to the person. That is a big problem, because if it's to that extent that there's nothing there, no spark, no interest, no feeling of potential, not physical, not emotional, there's a big problem there. Sometimes people only wake up and come to that realization after they have a number of children. But even when they come to that realization right away, it's embarrassing, it's painful, it's hurtful to the other person, and that requires much careful thought. I can say to you, in my experience, although many people think they're in that situation, much of the time that is not the case. Much of the time it actually falls into other categories, which I'm going to do my best to explain, even though this is a complicated and nuanced process that is certainly not one size fits all. I encourage people in this kind of situation to get professional help. Whatever you learn from this video, I hope it's helpful, but I encourage people to get professional help, because this is not a knot that one can easily untangle on their own. Truly, it's not easy, and don't think it's going to take a short amount of time either. However, this kind of thing is so worth it, because one's whole quality of life depends on whether you have a really good friend and a good partner, and somebody who you're happy to see and excited to see, and even that you feel sexually attracted to. Those are major, major issues, and it needs to either be resolved or one needs to cut their losses and go. It's kind of like investing in a stock, and then the stock starts to tank, and some people refuse to sell because they don't want to face their loss, so they just keep riding that stock out until it becomes zero. You cannot do that with your life. It's a very difficult and serious decision whether or not one should stay married or not when they're not attracted to a person thoroughly. However, one thing for sure, that situation cannot persist. Either it needs to be resolved by getting to the bottom of the problem, if it's solvable, which, as I say, I believe much of the time it is, or they need to cut their losses and get out. It's not a favor to anybody, not to yourself, not to the Eibishter, not to your spouse, if truly, truly the situation is not resolvable. It's just not. But let's not go deeply into that, because I do believe oftentimes it is. So there are some kinds of non-attractiveness that is of the obsessional variety. Now, obsessions are complicated things because obsessions are thought loops where the best way to describe it is that they become more reinforced the more that one worries about them. And the more that one worries about them, the more they become reinforced. The example of an obsessional kind of lack of attraction is, let's say a person resents being railroaded into marriage. Let's say their spouse represents to them the fact that they didn't have a choice. Even if their spouse has many attractive qualities, it is possible that the mere representation that they did not have the choice for their spouse becomes a small pebble in their shoe, and every day they're walking around with that pebble in their shoe, and it becomes very frustrating. And the more the person tries to drive that thought out of their head, the more it becomes frustrating, the more angry and controlled they feel. It's kind of like, I can make you the most amazing, delicious steak or serve you the most tasty ice cream or chocolate, but if I force you to have it, and I force you to have it every day, and I stuff it down your throat, after a certain point, you're really going to hate it. You're going to hate it not because intrinsically it's not pleasurable, but you're going to hate it because it represents your lack of control, your lack of choice, and that's going to make you really angry. And all you need is a small pebble, because after all, there are many, many people that have different degrees of non-attractiveness. And even the people that we love deeply, and even the people that we can feel, Baruch Hashem, that we could feel an erotic charge and real desire for, they still have features. They still can certainly have features that we don't find attractive. But those are like little pebbles in our shoe, literally. If you're walking, you have a pebble in your shoe, and you're distracted and listening to music or chazering something that you're learning or whatever, you may not even notice the pebble in your shoe, but the more you focus on the pebble in the shoe, the more you notice it. And here too, someone that really is angry and feels really deprived of their choice, and their spouse, for whatever reason, represents that, and then you really have that pebble, something that you do find unattractive, you could obsess on it to the point where it drives you crazy. There's also other kinds of obsessional non-attractiveness, where for whatever reason, a certain feature of the body, say the person is a little bit overweight, not obese to the point of not being attractive, just a little bit overweight. Or say they have a not properly shaped nose or eye, or a birthmark, or whatever the case may be. What might happen is, again, the person might obsess and focus completely on that spot, so it almost becomes like a cartoon. It's this giant, giant birthmark, this huge nose, where this, again, this little pebble in the shoe becomes magnified simply because the person has some obsessional tendencies. So there are people that, even if they were not forced or compelled into the marriage, there are people that have obsessional tendencies. And if they have obsessional tendencies about other matters, if they're perfectionistic, then they might project some of this perfectionism onto their spouse, whether it's about physical looks or habits. Oh, I don't like the way my spouse lisps, for example, and it becomes all-consuming. So, enough about the obsessions. The question is, what do you do about it? And again, I urge people, this is the kind of thing that really does require treatment. I can talk as much as I can to give you some ideas, but honestly speaking, these are difficult internal emotional processes. Ein chavush matir atzmo mibeis hasurim. It is extremely difficult to extricate oneself from these complex emotional loops, and they're loops, and that's what I want to explain. Imagine, say, you know what, let's take a look over here. Behind me, well, to my right and behind me, in the periphery of my vision is that lamp. You see that lamp over there? Right over there. It's behind me and to my right. Now, that lamp in the periphery of my vision, when I'm looking at the video or I'm concentrating on the video, I don't really see that lamp. I only see that lamp if I concentrate and I kind of notice out of the corner of my eye. So let us take that scenario a bit further. Let us imagine that lamp over there. Every time I glance at it, it gets brighter, as if my looking at it sends electricity to it. And every time I turn away from that lamp, let us imagine that it goes dimmer. Okay? Now, let us imagine further that my goal is for the lamp to completely shut off. So I want this lamp to be off. Okay? I want this lamp to be off. Now, let's imagine that I'm trying to concentrate that the light should go off. But remember, every time I look at it, it gets bright from the energy of my looking at it. Every time I forget about it, it starts to get dimmer. So what begins to happen? What begins to happen is I forget about it because I'm involved in talking to you, whoever you are. I'm involved in talking to you. I'm involved in this discussion that we're having. And I forget about it. But then I remember that I forgot. So I have a tremendous urge to check and see if the light got dimmer. And the minute I check to see that the light got dimmer, all of a sudden it gets bright again. Now, thoughts are electricity. So this metaphor is more real than you know. Thoughts are electricity. Our brain works electricity, and our brain works with association. So that means the more that we think about something, the more emotional investment that we give to it, the more that our brain and memory decides, so to speak, that it's important. The less, the less. That's why something scary that happens is very hard to get out of our head, because since it happened with a tremendous amount of electrical charge, because it was so scary for us, and then if later on we have nightmares or other things about it, it's continually reinforced, and therefore it stays in the memory. For instance, what you ate last week for supper, you might not remember, because it has no charge to it. What you ate last week for supper, if it was your birthday, you might remember because it has a charge to it. So literally our thoughts operate on electricity. And that is the problem with obsessive thoughts. You're trying to get rid of the thought, but the more that you think about it, the more charge you bring to it, the stronger it becomes. When you notice that you're forgetting about it, you then notice it again, and then you put more charge to it. So this is why obsessional thoughts are such a terrible loop, and they are highly problematic. And so someone who obsesses over an aspect of their spouse that causes them not to be attracted, and then they start in some way to let's say forget about it, and they start to feel some natural passion or energy or lust or attraction, and then you think to themselves, wait, but what about that wart? Wait, but what about that extra flab? Wait, but what about that wrinkle? Or even, we were discussing before, impotence in a different thing. Impotence could also be made much worse by obsession. Or we were talking about anorgasmia. If a person is having difficulty reaching orgasm, again, the more they think about it, the worse it's going to get. So what helps a lot, and it's not easy to do, is full out acceptance. Now, full out acceptance means training yourself to not fight the thought, because the fight delivers electricity to it. The fight delivers charge to it. So if you say to yourself, no, I really am attracted to that person. No, they're not really flabby. No, he doesn't really have wrinkles, or he doesn't really have bad breath. Or no, his nose is not too long or too hairy, or whatever kinds of crazy thing that people get obsessed about. Whatever it is, it's not crazy that the person is obsessing about it. But if you try to fight the thought and you say, no, 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 you're putting energy into it and you're lighting up that lamp. Okay? You can't do that. You will only get stuck deeper and deeper, like when you're stuck in the snow and the wheels are revving and you dig yourself into a deeper hole. What is important to do, and this is key, is to practice acceptance, mindful acceptance. Mindful acceptance does not mean surrender, and it does not mean distress. It means letting yourself fully accept this particular reality in a gentle, thoughtful way. So you can think to yourself, well, it is true that that aspect of my spouse I find unattractive and disturbing. Not dwelling in it, not sinking yourself in the muck of it, not fighting it, simple, gentle acceptance. And what you will find is if you practice that more and more, and it might take a lot of work and a lot of meditation, but if you practice that more and more, you start to master the art of truly not noticing the lamp, not sending the electricity to those thoughts, and they start to fade. Now again, this is only applicable and useful when overall there is reasons intellectually, emotionally, and physically to be attracted to the person. Then you could reduce your focus on these things that disturb you and be freer to notice the things that you find attractive and enjoyable. That is definitely useful. Obviously, if a person, like we said, is for whatever reason, and I find that to be quite rare in my 25 years of experience doing this, I do find this quite rare that it would be the case. But if somebody is thoroughly not attractive, mind, body, soul, all together, and there's nothing to find, that is a considerably difficult situation. Now, there is one other kind of a lack of attractiveness, and this one is, in a way, the most sensitive and the most challenging, and that is passive-aggressive not attractiveness. That means, what if your spouse really does not take care of their looks? Now, men like to think that they get a free pass on this, but increasingly in our more materialistic society, men do not get a free pass on this at all, and women are socialized to feel and experience and want an attractive man as much as a woman, and that's why these days there is more incidence of male eating disorders and male bulimia and things like that, because men too are feeling a lot of pressure, still probably nowhere near what the women folk feel, to be thin, to be this, to be that. It is very, very hard for both people. But there's a difference between somebody that is clearly making an effort than between somebody who passive-aggressively, out of resentments, out of fear, out of some kind of reluctance to enjoy their own body and their own good looks. Some people have a need to punish themselves even and to make themselves ugly. They might hate their body. They might have had sexual trauma or abuse and feel very scared to be attractive because they will then feel devalued. They feel that that's dirty to enjoy their attractiveness. Now, in a previous Chosson Shmooze, we went on with about a dozen Mar Makomos in the Torah and the Gemara and Medrash about how important it is to be attractive. You're going to have to listen to all these things in order, and if you don't remember it, you'll just have to go listen to it again. But the point is that when someone is making an effort, it feels attractive. There's a saying, I have quoted the French before because, well, they might not have everything going for them, but they do have a reputation of being great lovers. And the French have a saying, and forgive me for it being sexist because it really applies to men too, but the saying, at least, is sexist. The French say, there's no such thing as ugly women, only lazy women. And I would just extend that and say there's no such thing as an ugly person, only a lazy person. Meaning it is unattractive to see somebody who doesn't care about how they look. A person could not be the tallest, not the youngest looking, not the prettiest, not the handsomest, not the thinnest, but there is a tremendous difference between somebody who takes the time to look good and doesn't. There's a tremendous difference between somebody who does exercise daily, who eats in moderation. No, I'm not talking about starving. I'm not talking about needing to be paper thin or anything like that. I'm talking about showing your spouse that you care about your looks. There's a difference between someone who wears makeup or a man who trims their hair, who gets a suit that's cut and fit appropriately, who makes sure that his clothes are clean and crisp. There's a difference. And that difference oftentimes creates an emotional sense of attractiveness. That's not a small thing. And also, it is more attractive. So passive-aggressive lack of attractiveness is a major problem. And the biggest problem is, what are you going to do? You're going to yell at your spouse, you're not attractive? You're flabby, you don't do exercise? That's a major problem. So the only thing I can tell you is there are two techniques that might be helpful. Number one is go on a campaign to improve yourself in every which way, emotionally, physically, materially. Ask your spouse, is there something missing in your life? Is there some way that I'm not the way you wish I was? And work at it like a demon, because one way or the other, either just because naturally if you're working on making yourself attractive, it might create a certain esprit de corps, meaning a certain kind of feeling of togetherness that your other spouse might naturally also want to exercise or diet or work on making themselves attractive and pleasing to you in different ways. So number one, that's a great idea, and that might work. But number two, it's a little more subtle than that, which is that if your spouse is acting out passive aggressively, even if they're unaware of it, here you're being aggressively not passive, and you're working very hard to address the problems. Now, you don't do that. Don't stop doing that, I should say. Don't stop doing that until you ask your spouse, is there anything else I could work on? Is there anything else that you feel is missing? And you feel you get an honest answer that no. So work on this for a long time. I don't care. I mean, I do care. I feel bad for you. But I don't care if it takes you a year, because what I'm trying to say is you can't do this stuff and fix problems that are deep without putting in the time. I am not in charge of the universe. I really have no idea why one should have such a problem. But when you have this problem, there are ways to make it better, but it takes a lot of work. So when you reach a point where you feel honestly and truly that you've met many of your spouse's needs and truly have done that, you can say, without any type of guilt games or shame or anything, just say, it would really mean a lot to me if you could do this. I love you the way you are. I accept you the way you are. And still, it would be just really good for me. Now, that person would have to be incredibly selfish after all this time and effort you put in, and feel so loved that here and there they could take the slight narcissistic injury of you telling them that you want something. Hopefully that will work. Oftentimes I tell people in situations like this, imagine that every compliment, every feeling good earns you $1 in your bank account, and every correction and criticism costs $100. You can't overdraw your checking account here. If you build up enough compliments, enough good feelings, enough love, that you have $100 in the bank, you have 100 times the negativity, maybe you could risk at a very serious moment with a great deal of respect and love to say, I really, really love you the way you are, and I really can accept that nobody's perfect. And never use the word but, because but, al tikri but, ela batal. But is mavatal everything you said before. Say, I really love you the way you are, accept you the way you are, I appreciate your good qualities, and if you would consider a more healthy lifestyle, I would find that so much more attractive. That you can try. It's risky, always, but sometimes you have to do it. The other thing that you could try is when you notice your spouse doing something that is along the lines of what you want, even if it's a very baby step, be enthusiastically positive about it. So basically, instead of criticizing the negative, you're reinforcing the positive. So let's say, and inevitably many people do, they declare they're going on a diet. Of course, many people do, like quitting smoking. It's easy. You've done it many times. So many people declare they're going on a diet, and the next day or the next week, they lose it. But when they go on a diet, just say, wow, that really means a lot to me. No buts, no criticisms, no cynicism, no pessimism. Just say, wow, that's really attractive to me. Or if the person, for once, wears an item of clothing in the way that you really like it, even though the rest of the time somehow, whether it's passive aggressiveness or it's lack of fashion sense, or the guy doesn't know how to dress and he wears, a schlumpy suit, just notice that when the person does, because even a broken clock is right twice a day. Of course, that was in the Friedrich Doris, where they had Friedrich Doris is Yiddish for the previous generations, where they had analog clocks. Now, Niskat Noadaris thinks it's so schwer. We only have digital clocks, so they're not even right once a day. But anyway, a broken clock is right twice a day. Even the most non-fashion sense, passive-aggressive person once in a while gets it right. When they get it right, say, wow, you look amazing. This looks so good. You're so handsome when you dress like that. It might help, and it might take a long time.